All right. Well, folks, hello, hello, and welcome to Bugbear's Basement. I am Chester C. Busby III, and I am honored and happy to have you here with us today because we got a really cool show. We're going to be talking to Art Thibert today, and he's going to be telling us a little bit about how you ink and stuff. Because one thing that I've noticed over the many months we've been doing this show is that seeing something that starts as a pencil often looks really, really good. And then it goes into inks, and it doesn't look good or even more commonly goes into coloring and it looks sometimes really bad, and it's been shocking to me because we have these amazing pencils that end up being this muddy ugly mess, and I think that's extremely unfortunate. And one of the things we've done on this show over the past 6 7 months is to try to offer as much information and detail that we can to try to help all the creators in the community in this indie revival that's going on to improve themselves and to put out better product, whether it being how to lay out an Indiegogo page or how to promote themselves, distribution, whatever. We've covered everything over here, and we've gone through everybody who's involved in making a comic book. And I want to go back and get more focused right now, is what my intention is, and that's what we're going to be doing today. If you guys have any questions along the way, we're going to be talking to Art for quite a while here. And if you have anything you want to know or anything you want to interject, please do so. This chat, we have a lot of fun with the chat and goofing off and stuff. But today, if think about if you have a serious question, throw that down. Okay. Please do also keep in mind we have all our links down below. Of course, the one to our FanSpeak page on Facebook is an important one. We've grown to a pretty good sized community now, and we're really happy with all the interaction and the things that you guys do. It's very impressive and humbling actually, of all the interaction, the ideas, the reviews and opinions, and all that kind of stuff. And that's exactly what we want. As you notice on FanSpeak, unlike some of the other Facebook groups, we do not ban you from promoting your own projects or putting things up. We don't do that because we want this to be an open source of information for the community. And we're really happy with your interaction. Also, keep in mind that I have my Facebook, as well as my Twitter links. And if you want to get in touch with me to be on this show, please do. Of course, this is FanSpeak. It's one of our many FanSpeak shows that we do, and we want to hear your voice. We want you on the show. We want to speak icon to icon, as it were. I mean, that's why this thing was created from the beginning. It's the inception for us to be able to communicate together. And of course, also, if you want to be on the fan edition of Drone Recorded, you can get in touch with me, and I'll get you on that show, and we'll have that opportunity. And that's a lot of fun, of course. We love the Drone Recorded, and we actually have a prize, unlike the pros, because the winner of the fan edition, of course, gets a seat on the pro edition, which is really, really cool. But enough of that. Let's get into what we came here for today. And first, I want to come over to my co-host as usual and say hello, Mr. Denali Lama. How you feeling today, man?
I'm feeling wonderful. Excited to be here. Excited to have our special guest to help us along with today's show. So it's going to be an awesome discussion about art, which is always amazing.
It is.
No pun intended.
Oh no, it's almost magical, actually. And I want to ask a question right off the bat, Art. Welcome to the show, first of all. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me, guys.
Now, my very first question before we get into anything at all is, how were you so perfectly named?
It's like my parents knew something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they must have had either a time machine or they were clairvoyant or something. Yeah, I don't know. My uncle's name is Arthur, and my mother's father's name is Arthur. So my uncle drew, but my mom's father did not, from what I understand. So
there you go.
I don't know.
So you are an Arthur then. You're not, because I do know, oddly, sometimes people with the name Albert will be called Art as a nickname instead of Al. I don't know why that is, but I've seen it. But I assumed you were an Arthur.
So you guys want to call me Al for this?
We could go with that if you'd like.
Yeah. Al the inker.
But
I don't know,
anyway,
Al sounds like somebody you just want to pal around with, right?
that's true. That is true.
Or somebody who'd fix your car.
I did know an Al when I was younger, but he always got me in trouble. He'd always start fights, and it was just no good. But
Oh,
that was the '80s.
yeah,
It's very different world today.
We had an Al's repair shop,
Oh
like
yeah,
auto repair by the house.
that's interesting. Because the first Al that pops in my mind is the Mel. No, no, what was it? Al is Happy Days, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What was his name? He had a full title, right?
I don't recall.
Something
I
Al,
know it was Al something, and he
just
was a cool
Al, Big
character too.
Al.
Yeah, Big Al. Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. All right. Well, we're getting more and more people in here, so let me say hello to the chat real quick. We got George in here. Hello, George. TP4. Nice to see you, dude. Pixel Trader is over here. He says, "Oh snap, Art. Yes, you should come in here and say hi, dude." We have Model 3 in here as well, and yeah, no, everyone's very excited and popping up. Keep in mind, guys, we do appreciate the subs and the likes. Of course, this is YouTube; those things do matter. But actually, the thing that helps us the most is hitting that share button. Just send it out to your friends and family and your extended community, and let them know what's going on over here, so they can come over and ask Art some questions and enjoy the show. All right. But enough of the niceties, Art. Let's get right into this, man. Now, I gave my spiel in the beginning about why I'm doing this show, and I'm going to follow it up with a colorist and et cetera, et cetera. But what do you think about the concept of what we're trying to do here on FanSpeak, as far as delve into why art can just go absolutely astray from the pencils? What do you think about this trying to offer some assistance here?
Well, the subject is, well, inking is near and dear to my heart, but the whole subject as well. When I first broke into the business, I
Hmm.
started working at DC as a penciler, and I started working on the same exact day, Marvel as an inker. So I've always penciled and inked at the same time. So it was never like I was a penciler and then I was an inker and vice versa. I always did both, and I always inked my own work as well. So what happened early on when I was penciling is I'm not quite as fast and proficient at penciling as I am inking. And I think it's because of inking is more of, this is what I say to all people, and I hope you guys understand this. Inking is a performance. Inking is, you're in the moment. It's a performance. It's like you're on stage and you're a singer, or you're an actor or something like that in a play. So that performance, that night's performance, is what defines that performance. So if it's a musical and you have a bad note, or you forget your lines or whatever, for right or wrong, that's the performance. And ink's like that. So if you make a mistake, since inking's permanent, you have to kind of go with it. So I look at inking as more of a performance. It's not a process, it's a performance. You're in that moment and you're committing to it. So you really have to be plugged in. To be a good inker, you have to have razor sharp focus, and you have to be able to focus for long, long periods of time, because it is a performance, and the tools, the pen, the brush, they can get away from you very easily, meaning you can lose control if you're not really focused. Where a pencil, when you're penciling, it's a process. It's a process of drawing, erasing, trying to find the line, trying to find the image, trying to find the emotion. You know what I mean? Like it's a process. Like writing is a process as well.
Mm.
So you're trying to find the right word or the right sentence structure, a different way to tell whatever it is that you're trying to say. Inking is not that. Inking is a performance. You're in that moment. And that's it. I used to think that they were more related, penciling and inking, but the further I go along in my career, the more I realize the disciplines are almost totally different. That inking is kind of more of a performance, and that penciling is more of it's just kind of like a process, erasing, drawing, erasing, drawing. Anybody that's tried to pencil anything or draw anything knows that there's probably more attempts in your garbage can than there are on the board itself. You know what I mean? Because you're just trying something, wrinkling it up, throwing it away, and then trying something again. And so to answer the question, when I started, it took me a little longer to pencil. So I would pencil, and then I wasn't fast enough to ink my own stuff always. So sometimes I would get assigned an inker, and so I don't know. I don't want to speak ill of anybody, but most of the inkers I worked with early on just broke my heart. Like, you kill yourself on the pencils and you're trying to get things right. There's all this nuanced stuff that you're throwing down, and you're kind of seeing it how you would ink it, how you would put it together, how you would assemble it. And then you see somebody else's interpretation, and it sometimes would break my heart. Actually, it always broke my heart, to be honest. And I remember reading an interview with John Buscema, and John doesn't like inkers. Just he doesn't like them. There's a handful of guys that he really respects and likes, but he would much rather ink his own work just because of the interpretive factor. And probably just like me, the idea that the ink is permanent and that it can define and change your drawing forever. So yeah, I mean, so I think in a nutshell, that's why I started inking more than penciling, because it wasn't that I wanted to destroy other pencilers' artwork or break their heart. It was more that I wanted to make sure that it didn't happen to anybody else. You know what I mean? Like, I would go above and beyond studying their styles. I would go above and beyond trying to make sure that I was as accurate and true to the intent of the pencils as possible. So, and also I was just not incredibly, I was a lot faster. So I could probably ink 2 to 1. I could ink 2 pages in the same amount of time it took me to pencil a single page. And being a guy that was trying to make it on his own, I had an apartment, I had overhead, I had bills to pay. The inks just paid. You know what I mean? Like, I could do more, and I could pay my bills that way.
Yeah, no, during that the whole bit right there, I had like a dozen questions coming in my head, but so let me try to refine them into one.
Okay.
If that is the case, then why do we have pencilers at all?
Why not just ink something?
Yeah, why not just have someone do their rough out or whatever their level of roughing out is and just ink it? Why do we even bother to have actual pencilers and then it goes to an actual inker? Why is the process not always the penciler inking themselves? Why is there a separation of duty?
It's time. The way I always phrase these things is, when you're working for Marvel and DC and you're on a monthly schedule,
Hmm.
it's like we're making a major motion picture in 30 days, sometimes less. Sometimes, I mean, I've turned out books in a week's time. So ideally they're supposed to give you 30 days, but most of the time it just isn't the reality. So if you can't really put a book together in 2 to 3 weeks, you're probably not going to sustain a schedule, and you're probably not going to live in this industry very long. So I think, to answer your question, it's time. So you have to kind of be like, Ford and the Model T assembly line. You kind of have to delegate things in a way that you can get it done quickly. So if you can break it down into process, like writing, penciling, inking, coloring, lettering, uh, then you could have multiple people working on the project at the same time. Because a lot of times, we're turned in pages, and as a penciler is working on one page, the inker's inking it, and then a colorer is coloring, and then a letterer is lettering. You know what I mean? Like, they're all working at the same time. It's not like
Sure.
one guy finishes it, then turns it all in complete. So this way, within a month's time, you can pretty much have your major motion picture done, your 20, 22 pages done in a 30-day schedule.
I see. And someone like, for instance, with Jack Kirby, who of course is a legend. and it always comes to my mind of how many pages he'd get done in a day. His, his just prolific ability. But was he straight pencils, or was that finished ink?
I think it was pretty much straight pencils because in the day, I started this in this industry 35 years ago, and there used to be more of the penciler would be more involved with storytelling, composition, and just form and character. They didn't really have too much of a polished style per se. A lot of times the inker would bring style into it. So they would find an inker that had a style that could assemble the rough pencils. So what happened as everything evolves, everything changes. Really towards the image years, around like the end of like the early '90s, I guess, with Marvel Comics, and then definitely with Image Comics, and I was there for both of those things. Is pencilers started trying to dictate style more and more to the inker. So what they were doing is they were penciling a lot tighter, and then they were searching for an inker that could kind of match that vision. Where before, like most of the stuff that I was known for prior was as a finisher. So like when I worked with Dan Jurgens on Adventures of Superman, he was just giving me rough breakdowns. There was no light sources, there was no rendering, there was just storytelling and layout. And so I went in and got to add shadows and form and weight and rendering and style, basically. I remember talking to Howard Chaykin because my roommate was John Moore, and he's Howard Chaykin's writing partner, or was at the time. And so Chaykin had a studio. And so I would hang out there. And I remember asking Howard, like, okay, I'm a finisher. What does that mean? Because, I didn't know. I just had this title like, oh, you're just going to bring it together. You're the finisher now. And so he said that the buck stops with you. He said, whatever you want to do, whatever your vision is, you can put that into the book, into the work. And so he said, for right or wrong, that's what you do. You have the final say. And so it helped out a lot because at that point, I didn't really know what to do. So I started almost like creating a style while I was working on that book. And it was a style that was emulated by a lot of people that came afterwards. It was, Dan Jurgens called it like a liquidy style. Then later, like in my Image days and Marvel days, they call it like a bloopy style. And what that was is this kind of like, I could show you if you want to see. You want to go to the camera?
Yeah, sure. That would be great. I'll go ahead and white box you. I just while you're doing that, to interject, I guess, it seems to me what you're saying is that uh, the penciler is the storyteller, and the inker is the artist. In
or
essence.
like the kind of, but more like style. Like he can dictate the style of the way it will look. So this is kind of an example of what I'm talking about, where a lot of more traditional inking, like if you're doing hatches and stuff, are done like this, where it's a thick to thin style like this. And so what I started doing is kind of pushing down a little bit more on the edge here. And then I would do the stroke, and then I would push down again right at the edge. So it's kind of, it becomes more of like a bloopy, kind of like wet, like there's kind of a bloop on the end and then a bloop on the end here. So let me see if I can do it with the brush here with a real inker's tool. I haven't inked in a couple days, so I'm going to be a little rusty here. Kind of, I guess kind of like that. So it's kind of like this in one stroke. And so you can do it in very different, you can do it very organic. You can be very controlled with it. You can be very fine lined with it. So it was kind of a style like that, and then there was kind of this dot dash thing where you could put like a dash on the end or a dot on the end. I'm not doing a very good job right now. I got to warm up. Um, yeah, so it would go kind of like that, and then you could kind of continue it like that, and then you can do a series. It's like a secondary kind of line that you can do. It's just very patterned. So I hope that's come across with the camera. So yeah, you could do all kinds of things. So it started becoming like a desired style. I remember when I Jim Lee actually asked me to come over to work on his X-Men run.
Mhm.
This is the Uncanny X-Men before, the X-Men book came out. And so he was really into Barry Windsor Smith at the time, and so was I. And to be honest, some of this bloopy stuff came from Barry Windsor. He didn't always ink that way, but some of the styles that he worked in was like that. So it was a little borrowed, but what happened is it became more refined and it became kind of an industry thing. I remember when I was doing Danger Girl, J. Scott Campbell. Uh, I helped on issue 7, the last one, and he said, Alex Gardner and I, the whole style is based on the way you inked Art Adams on those Fantastic Four issues that you did. And so that's the first time I really had like that. There was some influence there. There were people that were emulating it and refining it and making it their own. And so I'm very proud of that.
Mm.
That was a contribution that I made.
Oh, well, I think you've done many things you can be proud of over your career. But it is interesting that one of the things I caught out of that was the fact that you said, I got to warm up, which has struck me as odd. I mean, I'm a musician, as you know, and it's, I warm up. I have to warm up to get the juices flowing, right? But it seems like that's something an artist wouldn't have to do, though.
Yeah, sometimes a penciler will kind of do some sketching just to get the eye hand coordination there and stuff. And so inking, I think, is the same. Sometimes, like when I start my day, my ink day, I don't always warm up just just because there isn't always enough time to warm up.
Mm,
So I'll just go into it. But sometimes it'll happen about midday. If it's a slow day and you're not really warming up or getting, falling into that groove. So sometimes it can take a couple hours,
oh,
before you
really?
kind of find that momentum. Yeah. And the thing that really stinks sometimes is sometimes it could be at the end of the day where you're really finding your rhythm and you're like, yes, it's starting to click now. And then, you're like, oh, I only have an hour before, I need to go to bed to start my day tomorrow. And sometimes I'll stay up a little later just to stay in that mode, just to stay in
Mm,
that, as you say, magic moment, where
yeah.
you're kind of making really good lines and you're making good art. So I'll stay there sometimes.
No, it's really fascinating because, I mean, I've noticed myself. Of course, our medium is very different, but when I was younger and I was only playing saxophone, um, I would take a good 10 minutes to warm up before I would, go on stage. But now that I'm singing as well. I always prepare my gig list, or my set list, with me having a couple of singing songs before I actually pick the saxophone up, and it seems that my vocaling, my singing, seems to warm up the saxophone. Interestingly, so
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
well, vocally isn't that's an instrument, right?
it
You got to
is,
warm
yeah.
it up. You got to, yeah.
But it's just, I know it's a little bit off topic, but I thought it's just an interesting comment you made. But nevertheless, now. Uh, I understand a lot better now after your explanation there of what the difference is between a pencil and an inker. Because to be fair, I didn't really understand very clearly before we had this conversation today. I always thought it was odd. Well, I was like, why doesn't everybody ink themselves? Well, et cetera, et cetera. Now I understand it a little bit better, especially the process. And so having a really good inker is extremely important. And we can see this so clearly. I've seen so many projects because the past 6 months of doing this show, I've learned more about comics than I have in my 45 years of reading them. You know what I mean? And it's all quite fascinating, and I can see so clearly with many of these projects, they fall down at the inking or the coloring, and it's really unfortunate because a lot of times the penciling we see here, these just stunning pieces, really well done. I mean, really good artists, but just they get lost. So, is this something you think we need to have more people actually learning the art of inking? Is that the problem? We have people who pencil and just assume they can ink. What do you think it is? Why are we seeing so much of that?
So much of like
Meaning the
I'm
pencils
not
are
sure the
great.
question.
Well, the pencils are really good, and then they basically become horrible at the inks or the color. Um,
Well, I
is it
think it's
just
a
a lack
different
of
discipline.
inkers?
Yeah, maybe it's a different discipline. Maybe there are pencilers that think it's easier than it is. Maybe they just don't have the focus or the disciplines to really pull it off in an effective way. Because the thing is, the assembly line that I was explaining before,
Hmm.
oh, thank you, is it's a process. So if a penciler is spending a whole day to pencil a page and an inker is spending a whole day to ink it, the penciler doesn't have a whole day to ink it. You know what I mean? Like it,
Right.
it just it just practicality to get these things done in a timely fashion. They just can't do it. So if there is a penciler that's inking himself, usually it's not going to look as polished as if an inker spent the whole day on it because they just don't have that kind of time to spend. Um, the reason like just to bring like Mike S. Miller has figured there are some guys that can do it. Like Mike is an inker. Mike is a trained inker, and he can pencil and ink in a reasonable amount of time. And there are people that can do it. But however, having said that, I don't even think Mike would want to pencil and ink his own book if he was on a regular monthly schedule
Hmm.
because it'd just be daunting. The workload would just be, it would kill him, you know. And then I know Ethan inks his own work too,
Hmm.
uh, but you know he's not the fastest guy, you know,
No,
in the world.
no, he's not. He's a pretty he's pretty slow overall. But of course, the finished product is beautiful. But it's interesting because that brings to mind two people, Ethan and Dan Fraga. Now, Ethan, his pencils are non-existent. They're just squiggly lines. There's hardly anything there. Sometimes you can, when you watch him do his art, sometimes you can't even tell what he's doing. And then he's inks. So it's like Ethan just kind of has puts the images where he's like he's spacing things on the page, and then he inks it, right? Whereas Dan
Yeah,
Fraga, I've seen that guy just ink with no pencil at all, right? He just straight up
yeah,
inks it. So it's interesting that you mentioned Ethan, and I think that because it's very different styles. So obviously, Ethan is an inker, and so is Dan Fraga.
yeah. Well, I think Dan, they're both kind of drawing with ink. Todd McFarlane works the same way, where he doesn't prepare a lot with the pencils and then
Hmm.
goes in and then brings the finishes in with the inks. The thing that amazes me about Ethan's work is that when he inks, it's not like Dan Fregas. Like Dan's, you can see like he's throwing the lines down. It's not as controlled. But when Ethan comes in, he's kind of like just inking from nothing. There's not a
Yeah.
lot there. So he's kind of making up the stuff with the inks. And the only way, I mean, everybody works differently, but the only way I can think of how he can do that in such a controlled way, like I can see Dan Frega's process. I can see that. I can even see Todd McFarlane's because it's not as controlled and tight of a style, as
Hmm.
deliberate of a style. It's more spontaneous and more kind of kinetic looking. But Ethan's is very controlled and very tight looking. And so he's an anomaly, I think. I don't think many people can work like that because I can't. And I said off the air to Chester and
Hmm.
the group here is that I was fortunate enough to meet Frank Frazetta a long time ago when I first started my career, and we were talking about inks, and he said this is what I do. He said I pencil tight, I ink loose, and what that means is that all the thought work is done in the pencils. So everything that you need to know about it is done in the pencils. So then when he inks, he doesn't have to think. So this goes back to what I was saying about the performance thing, is when you're inking, I tell everybody, I run a studio here, Hack Shack Studios. It's primarily an ink studio. I wanted to get Taylor Grosso in because she's an inker as well. And so she was a protege for a couple years now. We're writing together and creating stuff on Black and White and other projects now, but she pretty much started as an ink assistant. She's very proficient at it now, but it's kind of like where I tell them, you can't think while you ink. The time to think is before you ink. Because if you start thinking while you're putting lines down, like I said, it's a performance. You're going to get in your head, and there's going to be hesitations in your lines, and there's going to be missteps. Just like when you're playing music, Buster. I mean, Chester, I'm sorry. I always get the C and the B.
No, that's all right. Gary called you Buster.
Sorry about that.
You're free to
Chester. Is when I play music, because I'm also a musician, so when I'm playing the drums, as soon as you start getting in your head, you're gone.
Yep.
Because as soon as you start thinking about it, you miss your place in the song.
That's right.
You start making mistakes and things like that. So that's where rehearsal and practice and all those things come in, because it has to be a performance. You have to just kind of be plugged into it, and you have to just go with it, because as soon as you start thinking about it, you're dead. And so that's like how inking is. And so that's like when Frank Frazetta was saying that, I didn't quite know what it meant either at the time, but I always took it to heart. So when I pencil, I try to pencil relatively tight. And then I loosen it up with the inks, because it's harder to do it the other way. And one thing you don't want to do when you're inking is to be like uptight. Just like when you're playing music, you want it to have this loose flow. You want it to have this kind of energy that doesn't sound like it's labored, or that it's rehearsed, or that it's mechanical. That's when the magic happens, is when you can get to that point. And so I think inking is the same way. For me, that's why I say it's a performance, because it really is just being in that moment. And if you're too up in your head, you're going to screw it up. You just will.
Yeah. No, it's extremely true. I mean, I haven't counted. I mean, if you're any of the musicians listening, you know what I mean. In decades, dude. I don't even do that. I just go. Because you can't get on stage unless you've mastered your instrument, right? And a lot of people will do the counting, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And I don't even do that, not at all, because it's thinking. Yeah, you literally no thinking on stage. Yeah, it's true.
It becomes mechanical at that point. Yeah. And then you're not really putting in a good performance. You're just kind of up in your head, and it's going to be very stiff and mechanical.
That's right. Yeah, that's interesting. Because you being an artist and a musician, it's interesting. That you can see the correlation between the two. Which actually, I didn't even think about that until the first time we spoke, so many months ago. You making similar comments, and I was like, okay, I can see the connection now. But I've been sitting here asking you questions and interacting with you for quite a while, and we have a couple other people on here, and I'd like for them to ask some questions as well. The chat is having a lot of fun over here, but they're not actually asking questions. But let me drop over here to Denali. Now, I know, Denali, you have a few questions for Arts regarding inking. So go ahead, dude. Denali. Well, mic troubles. Live. This is the problem with live art. You see, these things happen. Yeah.
Well, I told you off air that my Blue Yeti decided to die just before we went on. So I'm using this chintzy headset again. I'm back in the Stone Ages.
But it works, though. We also have Pixel Trader on here. I'm assuming you know Pixel.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Hey, Pixel.
Hey there. Welcome back to Nolly.
Hey, go ahead, Pixel. Ask a question. Interact with Art, man. We're talking about inking, yeah?
Yeah, it's funny. I was listening to the thing here, and then you guys started going in about Dan and some of their stuff, and I know Dan personally, so watching his evolution as an inker over time has been really interesting. Just that whole headspace that he gets himself into to do his art, it kind of blows my mind. But I actually didn't know about the connection with Garner and J. Scott Campbell, that whole situation. So that's kind of cool. I really don't have too many questions. I've just been sitting here listening and geeking out, going, wow, okay, because I suck at inking, and that's been one of those things that has bothered me forever. And part of my problem, I think I've learned from some of this, is that I've tried to be too loose with my pencils, and then I'm coming into my art trying to clean things up and tighten it up with my inks. And I think that's part of one of my big mistakes here, is that I've been trying to do that this whole time. And so it may actually help me out quite a bit. So no real question at the moment, more like thank you.
That's a fair point, dude.
Yeah.
Your pencils are really good, actually, and your inks sometimes get a little muddy. I think that's
my inks get really muddy. Yeah.
Well, no,
Yeah.
I'm not being mean. I mean, Pixel is a really good artist, but your pencils are really good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, I do have a question. It's actually for Tag, though. It's like if she's not busy, I might need some.
Wait, Taylor, Pixel has a question for you. She's actually packing up right now.
What is
That's right. I was just going to say, hey, Tag, are you available to ink anything anytime soon?
Pixel said, are you available to ink anything anytime soon?
Only if it's our next project.
She says only if it's our next project.
Awesome.
We're pretty damn busy here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet
And
you
you
guys
can
are.
pay her like $1 billion.
Yeah, why, just as an off-topic question, Art, why did you basically decide to, seemingly, completely redraw black and white? How did that decision come into play, man?
I don't think it was a conscious decision to, Taylor, they're asking, like, what led to the decision to not just remaster, but redraw black and white? I think it was just
evolution.
It was a creative evolution that, I don't know if you guys are like me, we're all creatives here, is that what I hate the most is like when potential isn't met. Like if you watch a movie or you read a book or something and you see like, oh my gosh, if they would have just spent an extra hour on that, or if they would have just redid that scene, or if they spent a little more time on the script. Like sometimes Taylor and I, because we write together, we're like, that was shot from the first draft of a script. You know what I mean? Sometimes you watch these movies and you can see that. It's like, really, they're going to invest like $100 million into this movie, and they couldn't at least come up with a second or third draft of a script. And so it breaks your heart because you see the potential there, but you don't see it fully realized. And I think as we were writing and we were in the creative process, we realized, one, I think we also started falling in love with these damn characters. I mean, it started becoming like they were real people to us. And so all these character bits and all these different ideas started coming up. So it was, I don't know if it was as conscious as it might have, like you would think it was. I think it was more just an evolution of, hey, what if we did this? What if we tried that? And then those ideas became so amazing. And then those ideas led to more ideas and so on and so on. And before you know it, you're kind of reworking stuff. I haven't told Taylor this. She's in the room. There's a page that I may go back on. I think it's page 9 or 10. It's a splash page of black. I may rework.
Oh, there you go. All right.
Wow.
It is. Oh, that's exactly the page I'm talking about. Yeah, but he's a little like overly blown, like he's a 90s kind of like anatomy, right?
It was the remastering process was much less than.
Yeah. So, but the good thing is, we're also there's a lot of learning curve that goes in, because I haven't worked with Taylor on this level before. We put a PBS pitch together for a kids show a while back, so we have worked together in that capacity, but not as much as we have recently. So it's also just kind of learning, what each other can bring to the table, and trying to learn just how to be creative. That sounds weird, but just be creative, in a way that we both haven't really been in the past. I have a little bit of history with that, but not like in a monthly, year-to-year basis. And Taylor has written stuff and drawn comics as well in the past, but nothing that really has prepared her for this. So it really is kind of learning how to just do it, period.
Yeah. Now, I know Denali
Right.
was having a little bit of mic trouble, but I think he's back
Yeah.
now. And I know
Okay.
you have a couple of really good questions, so why don't you go ahead and ask them, man?
All right. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, no
Yes.
problem.
Awesome. So I think just to clarify, just listening to everything, basically to put in the musical, the inker is the performer, and the penciler is kind of like the composer where the notes are going, where you're kind of saying, here's where you're going to do the emphasis of, and let the things are. And talking about EVS and
Dan
what
Fraga.
do you do? Yeah, Dan Fraga. What do you do for those type of pencilers where, they're not really good penciling? How do you adapt to those types of inking? Kind of like if they can't really do really good guys or really good girls figures, how do you compensate for that for the pencilers
Well,
in that case?
if
Those are a lot of.
may I
Go
add a
ahead.
caveat to that? Why
Sure.
would a person who's not good at penciling actually have a job, which they do? This is a good question.
Because they're brilliant storytellers.
There you
They're really good storytellers. Because one of the main things is characterization, composition, and storytelling, and there are a lot of people that can't even do that. So there are a lot of people that are employed, and it was more of a past thing than it is now. Like I said, there was a lot of like when companies would hire talent like pencilers, they didn't so much look for their finished, because they knew an inker would do that. They were looking for story, characterization, flow, layout, just stuff like that. And that is a gift unto itself, And so there's a lot of people that bring that to the table. And so to answer your question, Denali, is that what I mostly get hired, or I have in the past. It doesn't always follow this rule, but since I can pencil and I do have a strong visual style and I can work in many different styles, not just other people's styles, but I can make my own style, like over a penciler. Like I can just improv, a style, just kind of like, and you guys sound like you have musical understanding, like how you can just improvise a solo or something like that on the sax or whatever.
Right.
So sometimes, a lot of times I'll just improvise a style, and I can bring stuff to the table with different pencilers. So a lot of the jobs that I've gotten in the past are over weaker pencilers, stylistically speaking, not as far as like the storytelling ability or things like that, more of a stylistic thing, or that their aesthetics are a little bit weak. So, I can go in there and I can kind of polish things up. And just case in point, not that Mark Bagley is a bad penciler, but stylistically speaking, he's kind of generic. And so, but there's one thing that he would always do. It's notorious. He'll drop one eye lower than the other. It's notorious. He'll do that every time. So as an inker, I don't have to redraw Mark Bagley's eyes or his faces. All I have to do, and this is I can show you this after I explain it, show you the visual, is it's inking on a side of the line. So that's what I call it. So if you ink on, depending on which side of the line you decide to ink on, determines where that line's going to be. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you can move an eye up or you can move an eye down depending on what side of the pencil line you ink on. So let me show you, if you guys don't mind.
No, please.
No, absolutely, please.
Yeah, it's a little heady. It's hard to understand unless you can see it. So it's kind of like, let's just say, this is an eye, right? Here's the eyeball, whatever. So,
If you could bring that page up a little bit, it's not in screen.
oh, okay. So there it is.
That's better.
Yeah. So, and let's just say, Mark, I'm drawing them close together just so you can see it. Like here's the other eye right here, right? You can see this one's a little lower, this one's a little higher. So I can make them equal by doing this. If I ink on this side of the line, I'm bringing it down. When I ink on this side of the line, I'm bringing it up. So you can see they're more level with each other.
Yeah.
So I just carry that through. So then I bring this line up a little bit, and then I wanted to bring it down. I'm sorry. And then I bring this one up. So what you can do when you ink something, because it is an interpretive art form, inking, is you can make little subtle adjustments like that all the time. And you can see I didn't redraw the eye. It was the side of the line I was working on. So this is kind of for all new inkers out there too, is because there's integrity of structure. So one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to change a penciler's structure. So like, let's just say, I don't know, this is the bicep, or I mean, this is the shoulder. Here's the bicep. Here's the tricep, whatever goes into the chest here. So this is very crude. So if I cut in on this side of the shoulder, I'm cutting into the structure. So if I cut in, I'm changing what the penciler's intent was. But if I ink on this side of the line, I'm not. So one of the things that inkers do is they bring line weights to things. So if I'm on the line or I favor this side of the line, this integrity, this shape always stays true to what the penciler intended it to be. So then I bring this down. And so then I work on the outside again. So that's based on, working on the outside of the structured line. And then when I build the line out to give it line weight, I'll build this way, not inwards to the structure, but outwards. So I can make this line as thick as I want. I can make it as thin as I want, but the penciler's structure and intent is never changed. It's always true. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Very clearly.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is kind of like putting skin on top of the drawing. Basically, that's a skeletal structure, muscle and everything, and you're just putting the skin on top of it. So you want to go outward because you're reflecting.
Yeah. Because if you cut into this line, you're changing the structure of what the penciler intended. So always work on the outside of the line, and you'll never ever screw up the structure. I see people, one of the questions that you're saying, Chester, was, how can some of this stuff happen? How can fundamentally an inker change a penciler's work so much? This is exactly how it happens. Because if you start cutting into this, if I put this thickness of a line on this side of the structure, it would, look at how short now the shoulder is. Yeah. You know what I mean? It becomes diminished. So that's how these things can happen, because if you're an inker and you're not totally paying attention to the structure and you're not building out and you're building into the structure, you're always going to change the shape. Case in point, if I go back to the eyes, let's say this is the penciler line. It's not an ink line. And let's say,
can you bring that up a little bit? Bring that up a little bit.
Yeah. Can you see it now?
Yeah, that's
yes.
Perfect.
Yeah. So let's just say I build on the inside of this line, right? This is the eye structure. I build on the inside of the line. Well, now that eye looks tired. You know what I mean? Like he's got a little bit of a lazy eye. He's closing his eye. But if I build on this side of the eye, you know, to build like the eyelashes or whatever, then this structure in here, from here to here, is always intact. So this eye interior structure is always met. It's never changed from the penciler's intent. So always, even interior structures, go on the outside. Like say it's the nose, right? Here's a nose shape. Don't ink on this side of the line, ink on that side of the line. Because if you start inking on this side of the nostril, you're bringing that nostril in, this shape in this way. So you're changing the structure. So always ink on the line or on the outside of the line. Go in that direction. And you'll never, ever ink it wrong. It will always come out the way the penciler structure was intended to be.
No.
Ink lesson.
No, that's extremely useful, man.
Yeah.
I do have a question here from the chat for you. And it's I think it's a pretty good question, actually. This is from Comic Book Bob. He says, Chester, please ask Art how he would handle line weights when the figure is against a black background. Since the figure is surrounded by black, you can't really work outward.
Well, if it's black on black, then you don't even have to worry about it. It's not even an issue. You know what I mean? Like I can show you. Let's see if I can.
Yeah, those examples definitely helps.
Well, here's the structure line, right? And so he's saying that, okay, let's just say this is the arm again, right? This is the arm, and this figure's over here. And so this is like black. It's just a shadow, right? It's just a shadow. So if it's black on black, like here's the arm, right? Still go on the outside. Still don't cut on the inside of the line. Go onto the outside of the line. But then if this is all black, then the line weight doesn't even matter. Because you're never going to see the line weight because it's against the black. Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense. And I know I've seen some people will put like a thin white space between that and the shadow as well.
Yeah, there's it's like a halo, like a white halo.
Yeah.
That's very stylistic. There are people that do that. I do that every once in a while, but maybe I'm old school enough or I don't really care for it. Aesthetically, it's a crutch, because if you do have a shadow on a shadow and they outline it like that, or a structure onto a shadow, it's kind of, I don't know how to explain it. It's cheating, because you're going to lose your structure unless you have the halo. So it's bad black planning to me. I know this is a little bit more esoteric, but if you look at like the old inkers, comic book artists, they'll have blacks on blacks, and they know how to kind of lay that stuff out to where they don't bleed into each other. Because the reason there's halos a lot of times is because they'll lose the form if it goes black into black. Does that make sense?
It does.
Like they'll lose the structural form because that form will just disappear and it'll become like a weird shape onto another shape. You won't define it as what it's supposed to be. So then what they'll do, like, let me see if I can illustrate this.
Yeah, because it seems like.
Oh, go ahead.
It seems like some of these ideas the industry's been losing, because when you're talking about it, like the olden days, it seems like they're using more advanced techniques and more, preparations and forethought compared to today's comic. I don't know if that's just a perception, but just listening to you, it sounds like there's a lot of skills that's been lost throughout the years.
Well, let's just back up. Like older comics, they were influenced by black and white movies. Like there wasn't color really even there. So a lot of the way you told the story, if you just look at any black and white movie, you'll see it. They told a lot of story and set things up more with like really dynamic lighting. You know what I mean? Like there would be like one light source, so it'd be very, very dramatic and dynamic. Not always, but it was more set up to be dramatic. Nowadays, it's more like just universal lighting. It doesn't really get into it as much unless there's a specific scene. So it's not as artfully done. So I think comic book artists of old were looking more at these high contrast movies, and so then also the only way that they could, I guess, be dramatic in the storytelling was to use these blacks and to use light sources a lot. So if something was scary, these characters would be uplit, and like there's different like moods that you can set with lighting. So I think those guys understood that more. And also the reason they had to do that is because coloring wasn't as advanced as it is now. So a lot of guys, if you look at their styles now, it's very linear. It's just kind of outlines and maybe some rendering, like some light rendering. And then they let the colorist kind of dictate kind of the finished look, like the lighting and some of that stuff. Like they'll indicate it with maybe some hatches or maybe a little bit of shadowing, but not a lot. So I think it's also just based on the technology that they had, or the lack of technology that they had at the time.
Right.
And also just stylistically what was popular, which were the high contrast black and white movies. So I'm going to try to show you guys what I'm talking about. Is I don't know, let's just say that there's a shadow shape here, and this is like this part of the arm, like the shoulder, or just stay on the shoulder idea. So we have this shadow right here. So my marker's kind of dying, so it's not that good. So if you have this black here, and then you have this as a black here, this black then blends into this black here. That's the background black. Let's just say this keeps going outwards, right? It's just like it's all black all the way to the end of your border panel. This is all black. So then what happens is this shape can be obscured by the blending of these two blacks. This is not a great example of it. I can't even do it wrong. I'm so ingrained in doing it right. But this right here becomes an area that the shoulder starts losing its definition. It's blending into this background shape. So like I said, this is not a bad example of it because I can't even think of how to do it wrong. But this is what they'll do, is they'll put a halo around the shape. So then you don't have this black bleeding into this other black. You know what I mean? So the shape doesn't get lost into that other shape. So that's why they do it. And that's why I say it's kind of, like I said, this isn't a good example of it because I can't really think of how to do it wrong, to be honest. But I think that's why they do it, because you'll lose this shape. And so then they'll still put, I got to wait for that to dry. They'll still put line weight. I'm going to cut into the inside of the line, even though I told you guys not to, just because I don't want to wait for that whiteout to dry. So they'll still put line weights in, but then they put this halo around it, and then they just keep doing the blacks, out to the border or wherever they go. And it's kind of a stylistic thing, but if you look at old comics, they never did that. They figured out how to do black on black artfully and more realistically. I guess it's more stylized way of doing it versus a more realistic way of doing it, maybe.
But the halos
reference is fascinating to me. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but the halos seem so flat. Like you were saying, it was kind of like cheating because it just doesn't have the same expression as the concepts from the movie with that stylus. Because it kind of reminded me of this interview back with Peter Weller, where he was talking about the RoboCop suit, where the limitation of the suit and him being the golem helped bring out the humanity, the limitations of coloring and focusing on the shadow and contrast, gave them that sharper edge and that distinctive look to make sure that they're planning and they know where they're going. So I mean, it's I don't know where I wanted to go with it.
No. That's a brilliant observation, and that's exactly why I call it cheating, and I don't really care for it, because what you said is exactly what can happen. It flattens the image, because the only way you can create dimensionality on a flat surface is to have shapes overlap other shapes. And once you throw a halo in there, you have no shape overlapping another shape. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a brilliant observation, because that's exactly what the outcome, what happens is if you can't overlap two shapes, then you have flatness. So the only way you could create dimensionality is to have those shapes cross over each other. And by artificially putting a division between, like, say, a foreground element and a midground element or background element, then you lose dimensionality. It's an artificial design element that you've incorporated into the work. And it can work. Like, some guys, they make it work. It becomes their style. But personally, I don't really care for it. I worked with Chris Bocello, and Chris does the halo thing a lot. And he knows this. We've talked about it. I diminish, like, when I would ink him, I would diminish it by 50%. Like, I would do the halos that make sense stylistically and work aesthetically, but the ones that would flatten the storytelling and kill the dimensionality of the panel, I would just not do. And I would figure out a way to bring the dimension to that image in my own way, just because I didn't think it was serving the storytelling. Because that's another thing that we haven't talked about. Everything that we do as a writer, as a penciler, inker, and colorist is all storytelling based. So if you're not serving the story, even though you're like, how does the inker, enhance the story? Well, what an inker can do is he can subliminally get you to look at things that he wants you to see versus things he doesn't want you to see. And one of the easiest ways to do that is line weights. So if you put a thicker line weight on something, it's going to pop more than something that has a thinner line weight, meaning you're going to see that first. So usually how these things go, there's always exceptions, you guys, to every rule. So always remember that. There's guys that break the rules constantly that make it work and it looks amazing. But as a basic rule, your foreground should always be the thickest line weight, your midground should be the medium line weight, and your background should be the thinnest line weight in various ways. Meaning, if you have a camera that's more close up, those lines are going to be thicker all the way down. Like your midground, foreground, background lines are always going to be thicker, just because the scale of the image is thicker. And then if something's smaller and pushed back, you're still going to have those same basic rules, the thicknesses, the foreground, midground, background thicknesses, but it's the overall line weights are going to be thinner. I have an image here I can show you, and this will illustrate what I'm trying to say. Wow, you know what? When Chester first said, Art, you're going to have to show things. And I was like, no, I'll just do a Q&A. And then I'm realizing how much I was wrong.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No. It's all visual. So here, I don't know if you can see it, how well the camera's picking up on it, but this is pulled back. Like these figures are small. So this is an example of what I mean by pulled back and smaller figures. They still have, like, this panel still has your line width. You have your foreground, midground, background. And each one of these line weights is like, these are thinner, these are middle thickness, and this is the thickest. But the scale of the lines are thinner. And then if you look at this panel here, all of these lines are fundamentally thicker than these lines in here, because the scale of this panel is bigger. The camera's closer up on these characters, but they still have line weights. They still have the thicker in the foreground, the thinner, and then the thinnest back in here, in the helmet here. So there still is, like, your foreground, midground, background line weights. So that's how you kind of prioritize. And the thing is, you don't want to be really obvious with it, meaning you don't want to hit people in the heads with it. So you want to kind of keep it subtly, or subtle, so they don't say, oh yeah, well that's the foreground, like it's crazy thick, and then the background's crazy thin where you can barely see it. You know, you don't want to do that. You want to be more subtle with it, so it still looks like a whole image. You know what I mean? Where you read the image as a whole, but then you can definitely, within a glance, like you can just see it, you know where every character is in proportion to each other within the panel itself. So that's kind of how I do it. And so let's just say, case in point, I wanted this gun to stand out even more because it's a storytelling element. He's firing this gun. I could make this gun even thicker than it is here, and it will stand out more. So that's an example of, like, if you wanted to take luxuries with it for storytelling purposes. So since this gun is firing, I can make this gun thicker, and it is still pretty thick. Maybe even like thicker than it should be or could be, but you could make this thicker, and by doing that, you're going to prioritize the reader's eye to see this gun. It'll stand out more than it already is. I like to try to be a little bit more subtle with it, unless it's a major storytelling point. You know what I mean? Like, unless this gun was like so pivotal to the story, I want the reader to see it beyond, you know, like before anything else. Then I would put a really thick line on that.
Now, that's
wait, hold on. My wife's coming in. Hold on. What?
Make dinner?
How long will it take to make dinner?
Probably half an hour or so.
Yeah. Can you start in about 10 minutes, maybe? Yeah, we're making our dinner plan. Sorry, guys.
Oh no.
Go ahead, Chester.
Well, no, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I've seen in the main point of this is to talk about places where I see the ink falling down in various projects, and I've seen that very clearly. People are over exaggerating the foreground, and just the line weight in the background is ultra thin, and it's such an over exaggeration that I think that's one of the things that's really taken me out of it. Whereas that subtle gradation, I guess, in a way, that's going on from front to back is much more impressive. And it's interesting you laid that out like that, because I see understand what I was seeing and didn't know how to explain it. Now I can. So that was very useful.
Yeah.
Thank you. I do have a
Oh, you're
question
welcome.
here.
I have a question.
Yeah, okay, go ahead, George.
Being an artistic chameleon of sorts, how long does it take for you to adjust to different penciler styles in terms of expression of design on the page? The way they put, I mean, like a difference between John Byrne and, say, Kubrick.
Oh, I totally understand what you're saying, and that's a great question. I think for me now, there's camps, right? Like if you look historically at comic books, there's different movements throughout our evolution. So there's like the John Byrne camp, right? That's a style, right? And then there's like the Neil Adams camp, that's a style. There's the Jack Kirby, camp, that's a style. And so if you're a fan of style, which is what I am, I'm not so much a fan of inking. It's going to sound weird. I'm a fan of style. So I go towards a penciler that has a unique voice, a unique style. So, I then become a student of that, and I just do it organically and naturally. I don't even try. It's who I am. That's in my DNA. So I've been called the David Bowie of comics, because I can adapt to these things, and I can take on new personas and I can reinvent myself. That's why I have a 35-year career, and I'm still, for the most part, at the top of my game. I guess that's debatable, but so the thing is, if you understand where certain people come from, where their styles come from, even when I was inking Dave Finch, I went, Dave, you absolutely love Kevin Nolan. And he's like, yeah. He said, my main style came from, and I said, let me guess. It came from when Kevin Nolan was inking Dan Jurgens? And he said, yes. And so I'm already tuned into this stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I already innately know where a lot of these guys are coming from, what school, you know, they went to, meaning what camp they subscribe to, where their influences are. And so I understand, even like when I look at guys now, I can see that's a derivative of this guy versus this guy. You know what I mean? That's melded together. And so then what I try to do is identify as quickly as I can, and then I go into the work with no preconceived notions, which means I understand where they're coming from, but I think I have a certain perverse part of my nature, my artistic nature, that I like to go against the grain. So when I inked Carlos Pacheco, I knew he wanted like a Paul Neary kind of brushwork. When I was inking his X-Men run, I knew he wanted that, but there was a little bit of a cartoony style there. So instead of going with the brush, which is what he ended up, you know, after I inked him, he went with more of a brushy kind of featherly style, like traditional, I guess, inks. But I gave him a very stylized, you know, more cartoony look. And I did that just to kind of rail against it, because it seemed like it was too obvious. And if I inked him in that style, he would just look like a complete clone of that other guy, you know, that he was emulating. And so more recently, I did that with Victor Bogdanovich. I think is he doing the Terrifics right now, or one of the books for DC? But I inked his first work on Arkham, the Arkham video game book. Mm-hmm. And so I knew he was from the Greg Capullo camp. I knew that he loved Greg Capullo, and I knew he wanted me to ink him that way. But like I said, if I would have inked him exactly that way, everybody would have just put their finger on it, and they would have just identified it, Greg Capullo clone. So I tried to ink him with still the integrity there, but I tried to change it up a little bit so it wasn't quite as obvious. So that's like some of the stuff that I do. And I think it's a great question. And I think it just comes out of studying comic book styles. You know what I mean? Like, just over the years, like just studying people and taking it in. And then when new guys come along, you know where they're getting their styles from. You know what I mean?
I don't understand. That's absolutely fascinating. Now, my follow-up question to that is, do you maintain the same subtlety in foreground, middle ground, background lines with each and every different styled artist, or do you actually adjust your thickness of lines depending on the different artist style?
God, you guys are awesome. I think it does depend on the style, but there are basic fundamentals that I'll never break. And so one of them is I don't ink on the inside of the line. And the other is I am a firm believer of the background, midground, foreground rules. So within somebody's style, I always try to keep those rules very fundamental. And I try not to stray from that unless it's very, very stylistic. You know what I mean? And those rules just go out the window. And sometimes that does happen. But within most people's styles, you can still bring those fundamentals. And the reason I do is because those rules always work. They always work. So they'll never fail you. You know, like if you can keep those two rules in mind, they'll never fail. They'll always succeed.
Now, it's interesting that we're sitting here talking about other artists and the styles and things that come in, because there's a question here from the chat that I don't understand, Art, but I'm thinking you probably will. Gosa Henry says, Chester, ask Art if he's familiar with Alfredo Alcala, and if he knows how on earth he could do that. So I don't know what it is he could do, but I'm assuming you know who Alfredo Alcala is.
Yeah, he actually was one of the inkers on Savage Sword, Conan over John Buscema. And case in point, I don't think John liked him very well because he was a little heavy-handed. But his brushwork is incredibly gorgeous. So I think what he means is that, like, his technique and the way he can work a brush is absolutely mesmerizing, and I agree with that. But having said that, sometimes, like, if you subscribe to too much of one style versus another, the styles don't always mesh. So I thought what he did over John was good, but when I looked back on it, like just a couple years ago, I realized that John was right. It's a little heavy-handed. It's a little overdone, but it's gorgeous. You know what I mean? Like, it's weird. It's overdone, but it's gorgeous at the same time. So did it serve the work overall? I guess it's one of those things, right? It depends on what you think is art. It's what your interpretation or your take on it is, you know. Some people might love it, some people might absolutely hate it.
Well, it is subjective, of course. We do have a, very very oiled bird from New Zealand has joined
I
us.
did. I
Art,
made it.
you made it. You woke up.
I woke up. It's incredible.
It's a booster.
I did it just for art.
There you go.
Oh, thank you.
Do you have a question for Art here?
I do. I do actually have a question.
Okay.
Yeah. What should I get for lunch today?
Okay.
Oh, my stomach is growling. Let's not talk about food right now.
That's a good idea. Let's talk about food.
No.
Yeah.
I do have another question from the chat, though. It's this is from Comics Legend, by the way. It says, Chester, question: is Art hiring at his Hack Shack studio?
We are looking for pencil talent. One of the things Taylor and I have is we have a couple projects that we would like to start, I guess, bringing to light to kind of, overlap the books and to try to, I guess, be more prolific, within Comicsgate. So it is one of the things we're looking for. However, having said that, I don't know how the heck I'm going to pay anybody. So, there's always that. But yeah, I'm always looking. So I don't know how you guys would get a hold of me. But if you want to try to get a hold of me and send me samples and stuff, I can look them over. So yeah, I guess to answer your question, I am looking for people. I just don't know at this point how I would pay you. So we could maybe work something out.
Would you like Pixel Trader to drop your Twitter into the chat?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that would be awesome.
Cool.
Okay, I just put up a straw poll real quick.
Yeah,
so,
thank you, thank you very much, Booster. I appreciate it. By the way, Art, Booster is our comedy relief. He's very good at it, actually.
I do okay sometimes.
Yeah, especially when you're not so sleepy.
Yeah.
He's got a new job where he basically watches things happen and he plays Pokemon Go.
Also, he's an incredible artist. I've seen him on the Drawn and Quartered.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh my god, thank you. And actually, my job is I weigh tomatoes and I play Pokemon Ultra Moon, not Pokemon Go. That's it's a big difference.
It's a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
How did you get that job?
Okay.
Nepotism.
I
know a guy.
I know a guy who knows a guy. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, there's tons of things we could continue on, but of course we've been here quite a while. We need to let Art go so we can go have his dinner. Of course, as we all know, happy wife, happy life. So we don't want to cause him any angst whatsoever. But as we get out of here, you were showing us Art when we were in the pre-show. You were showing us a bunch of art that you were just displaying. Think about what you might demonstrate. Could you do us a favor and just show us those things just real quick, because they're awesome?
Oh, sure. And thank you. Let me click that. I click that button. Camera should be on. There we go. So we did, Mark Bagley and I did turnarounds for the Ultimate Spider-Man video game some years ago. And so we did all the characters in the Spider-Man universe and even more, because there were some characters just for the video game that Mark designed or redesigned, and then I inked up. And so there's turnarounds of each one of these characters. There's 3 views for each one of the characters. And so I just found these. No, a friend actually had them in the old studio and found them and brought them into me. So, so thank you, Rich Birdsall, for doing that. And so, yeah, I thought this would be fun. And one of the cool things is as soon as you kind of get to a certain level, some of these actual inks become unlocked, and you can see the actual drawings that Mark and I did. And I did ink samples for the video game. So the video game is one of the first video games I've ever seen or anything. I think they kind of did that in Into the Spider-Verse, where they kind of brought a pseudo ink line into the style. And so that video game actually has an ink line style in place. So I thought that was a nice little nod and tribute to inkers and things like that. So that was pretty cool. So this is obviously Spider-Man.
The Champions Online does that as well with the comic book
art cool.
lines. Yeah.
And so these are what, if you ever hear people say blue line, inks over blue line, this is kind of what they're talking about. So this is Carlo Barbieri, his blue line pencils. And so then you would just kind of ink over the blue lines. And the reason it's blue is because it doesn't photograph. You can take the blue out. You can separate it. So usually if it's penciled, you have to erase the pencils after you ink it. This way, if there's a little bit of blue left after you ink it, it's okay because it won't reproduce. It won't print, basically. So this is issue 1 of Super Sons, Adventures of Super Sons, page 11.
Yeah.
And
great
so,
series, by the way.
Oh, thank you. And so this is some of the remastering black and white. So this is another example of blue lines. So the reason there's only pieces inked is because I wanted to jazz up the original black and white artwork. So I scanned it in, and so then converted to blue lines, and then inked some stylistic, like a stylistic approach over the old inks that I did 25 years ago. So yeah, that's why it's just bits and pieces. So I stylistically tried to make it to where it be more compatible with the new stuff that I'm incorporating into black and white remastered. And so this is a major spoiler alert, but yeah, here's the two and a more peaceful moment in the story. And so
good job, Art. You killed them.
Thank you. Yeah, here's some more panel patches from black and white remastered. So you can see, like, sometimes it'll just come down to like even a headshot or, you know, a part of a figure or a full, you know, redo. And so I kind of reworked the background character, you know, on the back. Because one of the things I do is I light box things, so I flop them. So sometimes I'll work on the back of things just to get it right. So there's a trick, like a penciler trick, where if you hold your image up to the light and see it reversed, you can see the flaws more readily. It's kind of like a mirrored image of it, and you can see the flaws quicker. So with a light box, I like to draw with it. So all I have to do is flip the board over, and then I can see whether it's working or not. So yeah, these are just
great piece of information just off the cuff. If you reverse it and look at it through with a light behind it, you can see your mistakes better. That's
so
useful.
Yeah, here's an example of it. So I kind of erased some of this, but I redrew some of the arm and legs and stuff on the back of the board. And also by doing that, you're not drawing over your image as well. Because if there's any pencilers out there, sometimes you'll have something that's drawn and it's like, yeah, but what if I tweaked it a little bit? And by the time you tweak it, you lose what you had before because you ended up erasing it or working over it. And so if you work on the back of the board, you never have that problem. So here's a Carlo page as well.
Wow.
So I don't know if you guys can see, but there's some blue that you can see through.
A little bit, yeah.
Through the inks. Yeah. So that's kind of an example of the blue showing through. Yeah. So this was fun. This is from issue 3 of Super Sons. Here's another. I got a whole stack of pages, you guys, so just tell me when to stop. Here's another. And oh, this is cool. This is I just found this stuff in the Thibert vault.
Jeez, look at that.
So this is Mark Bagley. This is the Trinity. So Superman, Wonder Woman. Yeah, this is pretty killer. And this is all brushwork. So the other stuff, like Carlo's work, was all pen and ink. Here, I'll show you the difference. Like Carlo's work was done with this. So this is a Crow Quill Hunt 102 nib. So this is basically you dip it in ink and then you ink with it like a pencil. And then the Mark Bagley stuff was all inked with a brush. So this is a Raphael watercolor brush, a number 2. So all this hatching and stuff was all done, and all the outline and everything was done with a brush. So it's just a different style. Mark Bagley's a little bit more old school, so it's a little bit more of a traditional look. And then Carlo's stuff, as you could tell, is more cartoony. So it's a little bit more stylized. So the nib served the purpose a little bit more.
Can I ask you a question that might be sensitive?
Okay.
Why do you think they decided to take, the Super Sons, which was very successful, very well liked, series, and just rend it into a million pieces?
Why did you let Bendis kill it?
Yeah, that's
I was just you beat me to it. I think it's Bendis, because Carlo and I were doing just the regular Super Sons book, and so then they wanted to cancel it because Bendis wanted to do something with Superboy. So of course, when somebody, I don't know, I like Michael Bendis. He's a good guy. He's never done me wrong, and at Marvel, he actually stepped up a couple times and stood up for me. So I have nothing bad to say about him, but I do think
I could say all those bad things if you like.
I do think sometimes when you give one talent a little bit too much of a reign on stuff, it's not a good thing. You know what I mean? Especially if they're not great ideas. And so I haven't read any of his stuff, but I know that he had something he wanted to do with the Super Sons characters. So then the book got canceled. And then they retooled it, I guess, based on his.
Now he just magically 17-year-old angsty teen now, just magically.
Yeah. And I don't know. I don't know. It is what it is, and that's why I'm here, you guys. That's why I'm talking to you right now, and that's why, I'm in this camp, because I don't like the politics of a lot of that stuff, and I just like creating just for creators' sake, just to do stuff. And I don't like to necessarily be told politically what I should do, what I shouldn't do, and keeping my mouth shut. Not that I'm really politically minded or overly, speak my mind, but it is nice to be in a place like hanging out with you guys where at least I can without being crucified. You know what I mean? Without losing my job or, things like that.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. And really what we're actually learning from you, so it's actually beneficial from us. We get a chance to learn from one of the best in the industry, how to make more comics, because that's what we're here for.
That's right.
And I figure kind of what you mentioned was probably one of the reasons why you kind of left the title to work on Black and White, just to create and just focus on something that, you love. You lost the passion to work on Super Sons after kind of maybe learning about Bendis' idea and not fully agreeing on it. Lost the drive to continue with the title.
Well, yeah, a little bit, but to be honest, it was more like I've done this for 35 years, and it just felt like a change would be good. And DC was giving me some pencil assignments. I was doing some covers. I did Action Comics covers and things like that where I penciled and ink. So they were letting me kind of spread my wings a little bit. But I think, when Comicsgate started opening up and I started rekindling my relationship with, EVS and Mike Miller, and started seeing that they had created a viable template, and even Mitch Brotweiser, which we can't overlook, and John Malin, in the early, the early inception of all this stuff, they created a viable independent market that didn't really, I mean, it existed when I was with Image, 25 years ago, in 93, 92, 93, whenever it was, but it hadn't been viable since. And I always wanted to come back to the independent comic books, because I have an independent spirit, and I started in indies. But the problem with indies is it's hard to make a living, and with you guys and the support that this industry, or this, I don't know, we're not supposed to call it a
or the comic revival.
Yeah,
that's what we call it.
Yeah, the comic revival, where this stuff is now viable. I mean, Black and White is now 56K, and we're like halfway to 57. I couldn't do that at Image Comics. Like at Image Comics, I did produce After Black and White, which was a crazy success. We sold over 700,000 copies, but that was in the day. But then, 20 years later, when I did Chrono Mechanics through Image, it was a break-even scenario. You spend months and months developing, this new IP, and then, you have nothing financially to show for it. And we all have to feed our families and put a roof over our heads. And it's just not a viable way to do it. And I believe that where we're at right now is a viable way of doing these comics.
Yeah, absolutely it is.
Right.
And I am, as everybody else is, really looking forward to getting Black and White, by the way. So good on you for that. And yes, here's some promotion. You do have this up here. Talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, this is I like I said, indie spirit, indie minded. I've done a couple funding, art books, different things, and so this was one of them. And my wife went down to the storage unit and found 200 of these books. And so Taylor and I decided that between the time that it would take us to finish Black and once again, to try to make ends meet and keep the lights on here at Hack Shack Studios, since Black and White was going a little long, and like we talked earlier, that it's beyond remastering, it's basically redoing a book from scratch, that we needed a couple months to buy us some time financially to finish the book. And so this is the book that's doing it. So we decided to bring this back. Like I said, it's limited. There's only 200 books in existence. There is no more. I have 10 in my personal collection, but that's it. That's all the books that are here. And so, yeah, so this was the book. It's 52 pages. It's full color. Here's the back. And you can see Taylor's logo here, because she helped me with putting the book together and doing the design work on it. So I can show you a couple of pages of it. I don't want to show too many. Yeah, it's really nicely put together. It's beautiful.
If one of our moderators could drop the link to this Indiegogo, please.
Oh yeah, thank you guys. And so we kid that we have super chats, and we're paid up to this double page right here. So I can't preview anymore until we get more super chats. So yeah, here's the 2 pages. So this is just leads into the book. And like I said, it's 52 pages. It compiles a 35-year career. So there's old Marvel stuff. There's old Cable drawings. There's cover work that I've done. I penciled and inked. There's book design. There's character designs. There's commissions. There's all kinds of stuff in here. Like I said, 35 years worth of a career. And this is an alternate version of White from Black and White that made the cover. So, yeah.
That's awesome.
So thanks for letting me pitch that. Yeah.
Oh, no problem. And Denali has dropped that link. So guys, definitely go check that out. That's a pretty cool thing. But we have definitely are getting on time for you because I don't know if you've been paying attention to the clock, but I have been. Your wife is about 6 minutes out from needing you at her table. So let's keep that tight. And I have to thank you very much, Art, for coming on and doing this. I think it's valuable to the community, these kind of things to help, because this indie revival that's going on is a really cool thing, aside from any of the politics or disagreements or whatever that's going on with other peoples. The idea that there is an artistic, illustrated based revival going on in itself is cool. And we want to be as helpful as we can. And over here on Fanspeak, we do our best to offer as much assistance and advice and from people like yourself that we can, to just do our part, because we want to see this successful. And of course, a big part of that is something like, say, IndieCron. IndieCron is a site that, Pixel here, he supports our channel, he sponsors our channel, and IndieCron is a good place to have all of those Indiegogo things that are going on in one spot that you can easily find out. And it's been really useful, I think. And I would ask you a question, Art, if you could. I would ask for some help, even though you've just helped us today.
Can I back up just for a moment?
Yeah.
Hey, Pixel, is that from your Oodles book that says 8 of 200?
That is my book, yes.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, that's actually the number because they're all signed and numbered. So Pixel is showing the actual image of the numbering system. So you got an early number. That's cool.
Oh, wow.
And actually, really cool to see that I had the 3 signatures on that. I wasn't expecting that. So that was really nice to see.
Yeah, and these books are being shipped now. My wife just sent out a bunch of the art book as well. So that's one of the cool things about the art book is it is done and I can get it into everybody's hands, right now. So what was the question?
My question is this was actually more of for asking for help. With this show, having you on to talk about inking, give a tutorial, and try to offer some assistance to help some of the artists, you were the perfect choice for that. And I really appreciate you coming on. Now, I want to do a follow-up show, same thing, but with colorists. Now, obviously, if I could get a hold of Elizabeth Brightweiser, that would be an awesome thing. But I don't have any contact to her. And but what I would ask you is, do you know a colorist that would be really good for this conversation, that could come on and explain? I mean, like you did. We need a really good colorist that can offer advice, because as much as inks fail people, coloring fails them more. That seems to be a bigger issue than the inking in a way. So do you know someone who might be great to bring on and do the same thing you just did here?
I know a lot of people, Chester. I really do. But in all sincerity, I don't know if anybody knows my backstory with colorists.
Yeah.
I went through like 20 colorists to get to this point. The guy I'm working with right now, I would turn you on to him, but he doesn't speak English very well. So I don't think he would be much of a help. And a lot of the colorists that I'm still friends with just kind of, not that they're anti-Comicsgate, but they just don't want to bring that kind of heat onto themselves.
Sure.
So I would turn you on to them in a heartbeat. But I think that they just don't want the heat.
Well, this channel itself is not actually Comicsgate. We are Indie Revival. We've never affiliated ourselves directly with it. We understand we're under that umbrella, though. We do get that. Okay, that's fine. I will dig around, but because I think that's going to be an equally important show as this one, because coloring seems to fail people a lot. And I don't know what it is, because I think there's just such an incredible art to the coloring itself. It's almost as if coloring is its own art form. Which
Well, I'll tell you right now. I'll tell you in a nutshell what the problem is, and it's the problem that I'm faced with all the time is storytelling. Just as I told you, there's like basic rules with inking, there is with coloring as well. And a lot of these guys don't know how to set a tone with color. You know, like if it's an angry scene, bring up the reds, bring up the hotter colors. If it's a calm scene, you know, bring the greens and the blues in there. Like they don't understand like psychologically how colors can affect you.
Color theory.
Yeah, color theory, things like that. So they don't understand that, and some of these guys don't know how to push things back with color. And then it's just like how he's telling you, like how to focus on certain things with the inks. You can do that with color as well. So you can heavily render certain things, and you can play other things down. And I think some of the storytelling is lost in coloring. So when you look at the comic book, you don't know what to look at because your eye is bouncing all over the place. The color is not focusing your eye. And I think that's the thing I see a lot with new colorists, because they have all these techniques, right? They can do all these cool things and it looks amazing, but it's kind of hard to find the image, how to read the image. And Jim Shooter told me years ago, when I first started at Marvel, he told me, he said, if somebody has to work too hard to read the image in a comic book, you failed, because you never want the reader to know that he's reading a comic book. As soon as they have to think about what they're looking at or how to look at it or how to see it, you failed, because it's all about storytelling. You want that reader just to move through those images, right? You want them to read them. You want them to be enthralled with what you're doing. And if it's too confusing, too busy, unfocused, then you have failed as a storyteller. And I think, in a nutshell, it's storytelling that a lot of the colorists don't understand.
It's interesting. Well, cool. Hopefully I can find a colorist that understands storytelling then.
It was more or less to answer your question, you know, how you were just saying, like, why is it not working? Why is it so bad and stuff like that? And I think for me, it's just the lack of focus. You just don't know really what to look at or how to look at it.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And thank you very much again for coming on with us, Art. I mean, it's such a pleasure to sit and talk with you. And of course, you keep in mind that we're all fans. We're all big fans of yours and the things you've done over the years. So it's exciting to just sit and talk with you as well. But I also think this was it's very useful information for people who are out there working, because as you know, in this community there are a lot of artists who are really want to do something. They're very creative, and if we can help them in any way, that's good for everybody. So thank you very much for coming on. Go enjoy your dinner, sir. And anybody else have any last comments they have for Art here?
Is there any way you think I can improve my art?
Well, without seeing it, it would be hard. But just draw all the time. Just always draw. It'll naturally.
Yeah, that Chester. I have to draw every time we're on Drawn and Quartered now.
You always do. And my only request for you, Booster, is please don't add male genitalia to everything, please. Okay, that's my only request.
I did that once. And it was,
hey Mike.
It was an accident.
It was an accident. Okay. Anyway, Pixel, Janelle, you got anything to say for Art before we get out of here?
No, just thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Can we drag Jim Shooter back in charge of Marvel?
Yes, can we?
I have no problem with Jim Shooter. That's for a whole nother show. I had some, not that I fought with him, but just some of his beliefs and things like that. But he did have a lot of great observations, and I think that Marvel was a good company when he worked there overall.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Would it be possible to try to talk with him, like how we're doing, like with a hangout, and pick his brain as well? Is that possible? You think?
I'm not as close with him as I once was, but I would say the best thing you could do is have some killer business cards made up and try to approach him at a show and tell him about your show and say you'd like to get him on.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, Jim Shooter, that would be awesome. Because we were talking about some other people we'd like to interview, like of course Jim and Chris Claremont and Marv Wolfman and some of these legends in the industry that have created
And
whole
Bendis.
genres. And Bendis, I know
Let's
because
get Bendis on so I can tell him off.
no, you would not be allowed on that show for sure. But
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you guys very much for joining us. We were going to do a bit of news, but I don't. I think we're fine. This was a great show we had today. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Do keep in mind that, of course, we have our normal shows Monday through Friday. Comicsgate news, of course, with Comics News Today, and we also have tomorrow. Will be the Pro Edition of Drone Recorded over on Mike's channel. So definitely go check that out. And of course, on the Thursday at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will have the Fan Edition, which is always awesome. Dare I say, maybe even better than the Pro
Superior Edition.
Superior Edition,
boys.
Yes.
It's happening.
And of course, we have a guest this Friday on FanSpeak with another Indiegogo, which we're always happy to do that and bring them on and give them some exposure. Do keep in mind there are several projects going on in the community. We would love for you guys to go over and check them out and back them. We have, of course, arts projects here. There's 2 of them, and they are being listed already here in the chat. So go check those out. We also have, of course, George, who was on earlier. He has Joe King, which is a kid's book. George does a lot of things like PSA type of work, helping kids with, the various things that come up in life. And so he does a lot of that work, and it's a really nice book. And we want to see more books for kids, right? Because that's one thing that the big 3 are failing. They're not selling to kids properly. So any book that comes through, like George's book or Hero, which is relaunched here on Indiegogo, which of course you can find all this through Pixel Traders Indiecron. We want to support that, guys. We want to see more good books going to kids. And even if it's not something you're going to read yourself, give it to a child, give it to your kid, give it to a cousin's kid, a nephew, whatever. We want to see more kids reading comic books because they're the future, literally. Also, you have another project, of course, from Brad. He's got his Handyman, which is basically the Mexican John Wick, and it's very cool, interesting. Brad's an amazing artist, as we all know. And of course, with Denali and I, we both are involved. We're both writers for the Tales from Beyond the Gate project, and that's a really cool project that has over 20 creators from across this community are involved in that, right? And we also have some pros that have come on and were extremely helpful to us in donating work to help get us some exposure. James Hudnall, Mike Marin, Ethan Van Sciver, John Malin. Gary Shipman as well, and we really appreciate them. But definitely go check out that book. This is phase 3, is what that is. You're seeing these. They might not be well known, but they're amazing talents, and the artists and the writers as well. Go support that project and just check out Indicron and see all the cool things that are coming. I mean, there's some really cool things up and coming as well, Pixel. I mean, you must be impressed by some of the projects you're seeing coming up, dude.
Oh yeah, there's some really big things on the horizon, including Black and White 2. Eventually,
yeah.
It's already up there being teased to everybody.
Yeah.
But yeah,
you have a project too, right? That you've been kind of working on the side there.
Well, he's actually part of Tales from Beyond the Gate as well.
Yeah, Tales from Beyond the Gate is going to be my first sequential work that's ever been published. So
cool.
As long as I can get my pages done, that's the key. So I'm still sitting here freaking out about having to do inks. So I might wind up hiring an inker to do my inks for me, just because I'm not feeling too confident about it. But based on the conversation today,
Art's really good at it.
Well, they're awfully busy.
I have nothing but time. Bring it on.
Yeah. Hopefully, I'll have something to show. I don't know if you're going to be at WonderCon. I know you mentioned possibly being at it. If I have anything done by that point, I can show you. But I'm not sure if I'm going to be ready by then.
Oh yeah, I would love to see it, and then maybe we can talk a way to tweak up, the work. I'm sure it's fine. I remember your pencils and seeing them, and they look really good. So, yeah, I think it's fine. We're all our worst critics, right?
That's true.
Yeah,
that's very true.
Yeah.
Well,
All right, guys. Well, thank
No,
you
I
very
definitely have
much.
much harsher critics.
Thank you guys very
Well.
much. And of course, as usual, we're going to let the Denali Lama take us out.
Well, I'm definitely excited for all these upcoming books. I'm waiting for the next volume for Chrono Mechanics because he did announce it way back in several streams after Black and White. So that's the other one looking forward to. But as always, your perception shapes your reality. So always make it a good one.
Namaste.
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 Yeah. Later, guys.
See you guys.